Mesopotamians were the first astronomers to make long-term written records of their observations 6,000 years ago. Ziggurats, pyramid-like towers with 7 terraces. Each represents the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Originated the idea of dividing a circle into 360 degrees and then further subdividing each degree into 60 parts called minutes, and each minute into seconds.
In 4000 BC, the Egyptians developed a calendar to be used for predicting the Nile flood and in aligning temples and monuments. Many of the temples and monuments, such as the Great Pyramid, were aligned with respect to the cardinal points north, south, east, and west.
The Stone Age was built in 2400 BC. It was carefully aligned so that if one would sit in the center, they would have a clear view of the summer solstice, sun rising at the heel of the stone. The sun rises in different directions in different geographical latitudes. For the alignment to be correct, it must be calculated precisely for the Stone Age latitude of 51 degrees 11.
The Chinese recorded observations of eclipses at as long ago as the 13th century BC. 900 solar eclipses and 600 lunar were recorded. The Chinese also recorded guest stars or exploding stars that suddenly appeared and then gradually faded away, and comets. Among these observations of Comet Halley on many of its appearances dating back to 466 BC.
Thales was the first person to use the Little Dipper as a navigation aid. The Greeks at the time used the Big Dipper for navigation, but since the Little Dipper contains the North Star, it moves less over the course of the night. It was also said he was to have predicted the solar eclipse in 585 BC, but it is questionable if he was really possible for him to do so. If he did predict it, no one knows how he did it.
Pythagoras developed a model for the solar system, including 2 features that marked the permanent break for previous thinking about the universe. The first model assumed that the bodies moved in circular paths. The second model introduced that the most objects, including the Earth, were spheres.
Babylonian astronomy goes back at least as far as 1800 BC and centers mainly on the problem of establishing an accurate calendar, so that the emphasis was on recording and calculating the motions of the sun and moon.
Aristotle was called the grandfather of science. He believed in a geometric universe and that the planets and stars were perfect spheres, though Earth was not. He thought that the movements of the planets and stars must be circular since they were perfect, and if the movements were circular, then they could go forever.
Astrasius figured out how to measure the distance and sizes of the sun and the moon because he deduced that the sun was so much bigger than the moon. He concluded that Earth must therefore revolve around the sun. His estimates showed that the sun is much further away from us than the moon is.
Eratosthenes made the first good measurement of the size of Earth, 240 BC. They knew that there was no shadow at the bottom of a well in the town of Syene on summer solstice. That meant that the sun must be straight overhead in Syene on that day. Measured length of shadow of tall tower in Alexandria on the same day. Measured distance between Syene and Alexandria. Was able to calculate circumference of the earth.
Hipparchus was called the greatest astronomer. He had little direct knowledge of his life. None of his major works survived. He discovered a new star and began the task of making the earliest systematic catalog of the brighter star. He gave positions and indication of brightness for about 850 stars.
Mayans and Mesoamerican flourished to Mexico and Guatemala between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago. Many Mayan buildings were aligned to the position of sunrise and sunset at the equinox and solstice. Venus identified with important gods, significant cultures, events such as battles, timed with particular positions of Venus.
Ptolemy worked with Alexandria from about 127 AD. He was the last great astronomer of antiquity. He had major accomplishments with the competition of his system that could accurately account for the motions of the planets. He wrote important works on geography, music, and optics. He invented latitude and longitude and gave coordinates for 8,000 places.
Arabs and Muslim astronomy began when scholars discovered and translated Arabic astronomical works and Islamic translators of ancient works into Latin. Their earliest translations were made by John of Seville.
Copernicus was a Polish astronomer who put forth the theory that the sun is at rest near the center of the universe and the earth is spinning on its axis once daily. The earth also revolves around the sun. Copernicus was born February 19th, 1473.
Tycho Brahe observed the comet of 1577. He was the first astronomical observatory. His Danish name is Tyge Brahe.
Galileo is known for kinetics, dynamics, telescopes, observational astronomy, Italian astronomer, physicist, engineer, and math. He played a huge role in the scientific revolution.
Kepler was a German mathematician astronomer, and he was best known for his laws of planetary motion based on his works Astronomia Nova, Harmonics Mundi, and Epitome.
Isaac Newton formulated the universal laws of nature with which he was able to unravel virtually all the unsolved problems of his day. Newton opened with definitions and the three laws of motion: law of inertia, action, and reaction, acceleration proportional to force in Book 1 of Principia.
Edmund was an English scientist who is best known for predicting the orbit of the comet that was later named after him. He succeeded Flamsteed and as astronomer royal. He continued to make observations such as a timing of the moon.
Einstein is most famous for his theory of relativity. He is the father of the modern physics. He changed the way we think about space, time, and matter. Einstein is best known for the culture of his mass-energy equivalence formula E equals mc squared.
Niels Bohr was a Danish physicist who made foundational contributions to understanding atomic structure and quantum theory. He transformed the view on the atom and of the world, realizing that classical physics fails catastrophically when things are atom-sized or smaller.
Wolfgang Pauli, an Austrian-born physicist and recipient of the 1995 Nobel Prize for Physics for his discovery in the 1925 of Pauli exclusion principle, which states that an atom, two electrons can apply the same quantum state.
Werner Heisenberg discovered atropic forms of hydrogen. Hydrogen was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics for 1932. German physicist and philosopher who discovered a way to formulate quantum mechanics in terms of matrices.
Edwin Hubble revolutionized cosmology by proving that the clouds of light astronomers saw in the night sky were actually other galaxies beyond the Milky Way. His greatest discovery was in 1929 when he identified the relationship between a galaxy's distance and the speed within it is moving.
George Lemaire was a Belgian priest, astronomer, and professor of physics at the Catholic University of Leuven. He proposed a theory of expansion of the university, widely misattributed to Edwin Hubble. He was the father of the Big Bang theory.
Robert Oppenheimer was a Manhattan Project director. He was responsible for collecting, coordinating, and heading the team that developed and detonated the first atomic bomb.
Fred Hoyle, English astronomer and cosmologist, primarily remembered today for his contribution to the theory of stellar nucleosynthesis, an often controversial stance of the Big Bang, on other cosmological and scientific matters such as his rejection.
Apollo 11 was the first space flight that landed humans on the moon. Americans Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on July 20th. Neil Armstrong became the first to step onto the lunar surface 6 hours later on July 21st at 2:56.